What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Ryan Mannion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Mannion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. All right, back with another episode of the Resilient Life podcast, this time with an old friend, Blayne Smith. Blayne, I was thinking about it and, I was like putting together notes for this episode, and I really feel like you and I have kind of grown up in this post 9/11 VSO space.
That's fair to say. I mean, I'm not sure how much I've grown up, but you've done a wonderful job.
Well, okay, maybe grown up isn't the right word, but we've it's so interesting just to kind of like see where we are now and the evolution of Blayne was very early involved in Team Red, White, and Blue, and as Travis Mannion Foundation was getting kicked off as well, we were all kind of figuring it out in the beginning, and it's just like crazy to see where the landscape is now and how everything looks. And hey, I think we have done a lot of growing up. I do. So, yeah. But it's great to have you on. Great to have you on. And now today, Blayne serves as the director of health and well-being for veterans and military families at the George Bush Institute. I was in the inaugural class of the Stand 2 program. I don't know if you know that.
I did know that, yeah.
Yeah.
Still a great program. That is one of the coolest things they've done over the last 10 years, I think.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
it's so cool because I'll meet people now that have gone through, and I'm like, yeah, I was class number one. Like, they were learning everything from us on what worked, what didn't, and I still walk away with that with some really great fundamentals in, for me, a lot of it was like teaching people about the veteran space, which I kind of felt like I felt knowledgeable on that part, but the leadership lessons that we were getting were really invaluable. And, as in anything, when you put a group of people together, for me, it was like the relationships that you formed with the people in that cohort. It was pretty awesome. So yeah, it was good stuff. So I wanted to have you on here first because you have a new book out, just released on February 11th. Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance. And I want to get into that, but I want to talk a little bit about what led you to writing this book. And so I want to bring it all the way back. You're a graduate of West Point. What year did you graduate?
2001.
2001. Wow. Yeah. So pretty timely. So, I think about that. So Travis was 2004. And so he was in that group of service academy students that entered into the service academy in a peaceful time. And then, everything changes, right? You went through all 4 years and then the world changes.
Yeah, it was totally bananas. I started in 97, peacetime Army. Clinton was president. The Army was contracting. People were going to the service academies, at least West Point, and were being offered early outs. People were serving like 2 years on active duty and being asked by DOD if they wouldn't mind just getting out early. And people were like, yeah, sure, no problem.
Thanks for the free education.
Yeah, and I tell people this all the time. That is the Army I thought I was joining. I didn't have some sort of burning passion to go be a soldier or to serve in the military. I just was like a very kind of lower middle class kid that was trying to do well academically. And elite institutions were very expensive, and West Point was not. And I was like, oh, this is probably the way to go. And then I graduate in June. I think my life is going to be one way. A few months later, I'm in the officer basic course. 9/11 happens. Bends the trajectory of my life pretty significantly at that point.
Did you have military in your family, like background in the military, or did you enter into it strictly based off of the opportunity?
Yeah, not much. So my dad was in the Army for a brief period in the late 60s. He graduated high school in 68, joined the Army in 1969 and did like 2.5 years on active duty. He was actually over in Germany as a telecommunicator, never went over to Vietnam. But there was a little bit of service in our family. I didn't know much about it. My dad never talked much about it. And that was really about all there was. And so my decision to go to West Point was a very practical decision based on economics, education, and I also played golf in high school. I grew up down in Florida, and West Point offered me a chance to play at the college level. So I was just like, it was a very selfish, very practical decision, and I knew I would have to serve, and I was like okay with that.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I got to go to the academy so I can become a lieutenant and be in the Army. I was not thinking that way then.
So let me ask you, had you been graduating from high school post 9/11, do you think you would have made the same decision about going to West Point?
That's a good question. I would like to say yes, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because the way I felt about service after 9/11 was so different than the way I felt about my Army service before that. Now, granted, I had 4 years of indoctrination at West Point to kind of prime me for that
Yeah.
feeling. Um, but a lot of people felt a lot of ways after 9/11, including our mutual friend, Jason McCarthy.
Hmm.
Lots of people walked into the recruiter's office to sign up, and I may have been one of those people. Certainly grew up very patriotic, but I'm not going to sit here and say definitely I would have. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter's a plebe at the Naval Academy right now, and again, I go and speak to second class midshipmen every year, and the further and further we get out from the post 9/11 wars, one of the things that they talk to us about in the Leadership Institute, where is making sure they understand that things can change in a second. And so, before when I started talking to the second class there, we were still in Afghanistan, we were still at war. And so it was just kind of like, hey, this is the realities of things. I give the talk with Brian Stan, who's a 2003 grad from the Naval Academy. And so he gets into like all of it, like this is what it looks like. I give more of the inspirational message. But as we got further and further away, they kind of came back to us. They're like, hey, these kids need a reminder, because I think a large majority of them are coming in the same way you did, right? And not even imagining that things can change literally in the blink of an eye. So, I appreciate that they are doing a good job of making sure that that is front and center of every midshipman, and I'm sure every cadet's mind, that things can look very differently from where they are right now to where they're going to be when they graduate. Hopefully it's not, but the reality is it may be. So, yeah.
I think the world that we're living in right now, if it indicates anything, it's that we're not really sure what's around the corner.
Right.
I think if you're thinking economically, sociopolitically, militarily, I think we're all kind of trying to make peace with the fact that there's just a great deal of uncertainty in the world right now, and we probably should stay on the balls of our feet just in case.
Yeah, exactly. So you served from 2001 to 2010, and you spent most of 2004 in Iraq and led more than 200 combat patrols. Talk to us a little bit about your time on your deployments and kind of how that shaped what you did coming back and getting out of service.
Yeah, so I did two combat deployments, one to Iraq in 2004 as a conventional Army guy. I was a scout platoon leader in the 1st Cav, and I did a deployment as a Special Forces team leader in 2009 to Afghanistan. So I got two very different looks at it, and they were two very different deployments. I mean, my career, I guess, would be summed up as a tale of two deployments. So my first one in 2004, 25-year-old first lieutenant, had a brigade reconnaissance team that had what would generally be described, I think, as a good deployment. I mean, it was hard, it was miserable. We saw lots of really horrible things, but all my soldiers made it home. I made it home in one piece. I left with a lot of confidence coming out of that deployment. I was really enthusiastic about trying to go to the Special Forces pipeline and continue my career. I felt really good about it, I would say, overall. And then you go through a couple of years of Special Forces training, get on a team, train up for a year or two, That was all incredibly positive. I had an awesome team, was in a great unit. We were really good at what we did. I think we had a great reputation. Went to Afghanistan in '09 and just got my nuts kicked in, for lack of a better term. As you know, four of my teammates and one of our interpreters were all KIA in the span of about 8 days in February of 2009. In fact, just right now in this window. So I think about those times with a bit of a heavy heart. And I had planned to transition out of the service after my time on a team. So in 2010, I intended to separate from the Army and kind of move on into civilian life. But having my last deployment, kind of my last gig in the military, end that way and go that way was, I mean, it's obviously unexpected, but it was really very hard on me to leave the Army on those terms,
Yeah.
because it felt like I had just sort of gotten my butt kicked and quit. And that wasn't the truth, and I can appreciate that now, but it sure felt that way for a couple of years after getting out. So my first couple of years outside the Army were not especially nice for me or my family, as we all tried to get our head around that last really traumatic deployment, but also just the transition was pretty quick and pretty stark. I think we do a much better job of being aware of those things now, but we just didn't know what we were doing or getting ourselves into back then. I think we all thought we could just let's just move on.
Muscle through it, tough it out.
That way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's so funny because it wasn't that long ago, but if you look at the scope of the veteran landscape, and obviously you've played a super significant role in this, and just like erasing some of that stigma of like, hey, suck it up and you're out, move on. It wasn't that long ago that was kind of the mentality around it.
Okay.
And I was having this conversation with our COO today, Josh Jabin, who obviously as well. And, one of the things that we were talking about, because we were specifically talking about veteran suicide this morning. We were analyzing some of like our data and our numbers around the veterans that are involved in our programs. And, Josh said to me, he lost one of his Marines just recently to suicide. And he just said, like, I am having such a tough time, like, swallowing these suicide losses. He said, I thought there was nothing worse than losing my friends in combat. And here I am 20 years later, and losing my friends to suicide is just like, it's there's no words for it, And here we are, he's 45 years old and he's still losing his friends, 20 years since he's been in Iraq. And it's tough. And I try to think about, all of the different things that we are doing to combat this. But at the end of the day, it's still not enough,
No, it's not nearly enough. And your organization is obviously doing great work. And so many of the people that we've worked with over the last 10 or 12 years are doing everything we can, I think. But there's just no replacement for people having close, meaningful personal connections and meaningful work endeavors, and a sense of purpose in their life. And I don't think that's 100% solution for everybody. I mean, there are some things that some of us are wrestling with that just require, real, sometimes clinical help. But I think most folks are still pretty deeply lacking of those close personal friendships and a deep, meaningful purpose in their life. And you can't just like snap your fingers and have it. My family moved to Maine a couple of years ago, and I love it here. It is amazing. We've met so many nice people. But the fact of the matter is, I don't have like deeply rooted personal friendships of people that I grew up with here or went to high school with here.
Right.
I'm not involved in the community here the way I was where we lived in Tampa for 13 years. And I think about it all the time. And like, I am like out meeting people, going to coffee, joining the CrossFit gym. I'm like doing all the moves because I know that's what I need and I know that's what works. But even someone like me who's totally aware of it and is like incredibly proactive at trying to build it,
it's still hard.
I can't just snap my fingers and have like this deeply rooted purpose in my community and all these friendships. Like it's just hard work,
Yeah.
and you can't really do it for people. You just kind of have to facilitate the opportunities, and there's really no substitute for it.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if you can remember a time. I certainly can, back in the early days of starting the Travis Manning Foundation, and there was kind of there were the post 9/11 groups. It was TMF, RWB, the Mission Continues, Team Rubicon, and we were these like young baby post 9/11 groups that were all about connection and community. And I remember having conversations with the VA back in the early days, and they looked at me like everything I was saying was going straight over their head. They couldn't comprehend that connection to community was a key factor in prevention of, mental health epidemics. And it was like talking to a wall. And listen, I will say that's completely changed. So I'll give the VA credit. They have 100% come around. But it was beating down doors for people to understand that we can't just deal with veterans when they're in crisis mode. Like it can't be like, let's just wait for them to get to that point, and then we'll give them the hotline to call. Like, and then we'll deal, like, what are we doing to proactively make sure they don't get to that point? And that's what I kept saying every time we had conversations. It's like, well, what are you doing to make sure, like, what are you doing to prevent them from calling that suicide hotline? And there were no answers for it, And so it was like pulling hair the whole time. And I'm sure you dealt with a lot of that as well in the beginning.
Dude, I had 1 million conversations with funders and other people like, so you're going to get veterans to run? I don't get it. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
This is not what we're talking about here. First of all, exercise is actually really good for people. So let's not poo-poo the benefits of exercise and physical activity with regard to mood and stress and anxiety. But let's get beyond that. If you have someone to meet up with every Wednesday and they're counting on you being there, and you can share some sweat together or volunteer together, like, of course that's going to lead to friendships. And of course those friendships are going to have like a prophylactic effect on things like post-traumatic stress or depression or suicide risk or all these things. And I think what your organization had to do, and certainly what we had to do at Team RWB at one point, was to kind of go away from all of that and stop trying to convince people that controlled the purse strings or had all the influence, and just build a groundswell. Start at the very ground level and get so many thousands of veterans involved that like it was deafening. It could no longer be denied. It was like the market had spoken. And eventually the funders and the corporate sponsors, whether it was philanthropists or whomever, and the VA all had to kind of stand up and take notice and be like, what is with all these freaking t-shirts? Who are these people? What cult have you joined? And Facebook was like exploding with all this stuff. And eventually it was like, oh, the people have spoken. This is what they want. So we've got to, start actually dealing with this.
We always say like, for us, it was this movement. Right? Like, and it's funny because I have people that'll call me up and say like, I'd like to talk to you about like nonprofit. I'm starting a nonprofit and what you did. And I'm like, I'm not the right person to talk to because, honestly, I'm like, listen, it was just something that was beyond my control. It was like you said, like people would join and then they tell their friend and then they tell their friend. And it was just this idea of like what connected them to this common purpose, which was serving together, being like-minded, getting out there, and all the things, So yeah, it's a good place that we're in. But again, I don't want to take away from the idea of what happens when a veteran gets to that place. And one of the things that I think is so incredible is what the Bush Institute has done with their check-in program. And, I can tell you from firsthand experience, we have had veterans in our headquarters outside of Philadelphia walk in, and we are on the phone with check-in in 20 minutes getting resources and help for these individuals. So I can say firsthand, I have seen that it works. And here's the other crazy thing. So, well, first, explain a little bit about what check-in is, so for the audience, so they understand the process.
Yeah, sure. So as we were saying, there's a lot of things we can do to get upstream to help people, with some of these challenges. But you and I both understand that we're going to have people that we bump up against that need real kind of high quality clinical help for whether it's post-traumatic stress or depression or a head injury or things like that. And the challenge is when you get to a point where you need that kind of care, it can be very stressful figuring out where to go. Are you eligible for this? How much is it going to cost? But navigating that landscape of mental and brain health is not super simple,
Yeah.
even still at this point. And so the idea was, what if there's an easy button? What if you're a person who could use some support for mental or brain health, or you've got a friend or a spouse or somebody who could use some support? What do you do? Because you don't want to do nothing, but you also don't want to do the wrong thing. And most of us are not qualified to sort of figure all this out and know exactly what to do. So if instead of having to diagnose yourself or your buddy or navigate the landscape, if you could just hit an easy button and you could get connected to the most appropriate, high quality, no cost mental and brain health care available, how cool would that be? What
Yeah.
if we could build that? And so we spent like 3.5 years essentially building that. Check in is designed to be the easy button for a veteran, a military spouse, a friend to get connected to that kind of care. And so all you do is go to veterancheckin.org. You fill in a very brief kind of contact form with just like your demographic information and how to contact you. And a real life human being who's a trained social worker and understands the veteran landscape, has direct access to all the highest quality programs, will reach out to you proactively, set up a time to chat, get a sense of what you're going through, and then they will make a warm handoff. They will get you directly connected to the most appropriate organization to help you with what it is you need. Like it really, from the user's end, it couldn't be simpler. There's a lot that went into kind of making it work that way.
Yeah, of
But
course.
from the user's end, that's what we're trying to do.
Well, and I will tell you, so we do quarterly. We send out a quarterly email to our database and our veterans within our database, and spouses, military connected, and it's very simple. It's a one line email that says, "Do you have any unmet mental health needs?" I can tell you that every time we send that email out, I am disheartened by the number of people that click yes to that. But what we do is automatically get them set up through check-in. And the number of people that have come back and say, "Holy crap, a live person just called me," is astronomical. And that in itself is so huge because there are so many lines of access to care. I'll say it like that. But that access to care is pages and pages of long of data input that you have to put in, only to be sent to another resource that you have to fill out. And for somebody that is struggling, like that, to ask them to put in that amount of time to filling out forms before they even talk to a live human being. Like I think about for me, when I call Comcast now, when my power's out and I can't get to, or my cable's out and I can't get to that live human. And I'm like, this is such bullshit. I want to talk to a human being. Imagine being in that place of just sheer, like I'm at that point and you can't get on with the human. And that's the beauty of check-in. The beauty of check-in is that you are getting on the phone and you are getting a call from a live human that's going to help you and connect you where you need to be connected. So I can't speak more highly of the program, and not just check-in itself, but also the way that you engage other organizations to be a part of it. I know the Travis Manning Foundation is proud to be a partner with you guys with the check-in program. So kudos to everyone at the Bush Institute for making sure that this was a priority.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, TMF has done an amazing job in utilizing the resource. I know when those emails go out without you even telling me because I see the spike in connections that come through to check in, and it's sort of a unique thing in that it's been a huge team effort. So no one really kind of owns check in. The Bush Institute has been leading it, but it's the result of the Veteran Wellness Alliance, which is essentially just a collection of organizations like yours that are out there engaging with veterans every single day in these non-clinical ways. as well as all these clinical partners that
Yeah.
are providing really great care, like Cohen Veterans Network and Centerstone and Headstrong and others, Marcus Institute for Brain Health. Uh, the idea that every one of these organizations that has a very full plate of things to do and lots of funding priorities and other things going on would come together and decide we're going to all collaborate on this thing and make it work is something like I've never seen in the veteran space, and it's the only way that it goes. So it's really a special thing. It's clear that everyone saw the need, and it wouldn't work the way it does without the trusted voice of people like the volunteers at TMF saying, "Hey, if you have a need here, you can go here, and it's going to be okay."
Yeah.
Because mental health is one of those things that you can't just fire off an Instagram ad or a TV commercial or something and say, this is the best, no cost, highest quality thing for veterans. Like some people will respond to that, but most people will not.
Right.
It takes a trusted hand, a trusted voice to say, hey, this is actually good. You can trust it. You should check this out. Then it works. That's why the human stuff is so important, not just on our end with the connectors, but on your end with the volunteers and the leaders saying, this is where you should look. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, it's good stuff. And again, I think that as we continue to navigate and, figure out what works best, I think that we've come so far, for all the work that is still to be done. I look back to 2007, 2008, when our organizations first kind of came into play. I think RWB was like 2010, around there.
Yeah.
And we've come so far since then. So it's kind of cool to look back and see how far we come. Not to say there's not still so much more to do, but we're in a good place. All right, so let's talk about your book a little bit. Perseverance is greater than endurance. You wrote this with your partner, Brandon Young. Tell us a little bit about the process. Like, why did you decide to write this book?
It's a really good question because, as you know, writing a book is not a simple or straightforward or short process. So Brandon and I started a leadership development consultancy back in 2020. We actually launched our website and got kicked off on March 17th of 2020. And then a couple of days later, the whole world shut down for COVID.
Good timing.
So all of our gigs canceled and like, oh, that was fun building a website with you, Brandon. I guess we should dust our resumes off. But over the course of the next 6 or 9 months, what we saw over and over again was the uncertainty that COVID had created, like really rocked everybody to their core. And there were things about COVID that were very clearly and tangibly bad. I mean, it was a disease. People were getting sick. People were dying. People were losing their businesses. A lot of bad things happened during COVID, and that's undeniable. But something else that we saw amongst people who were reasonably healthy, reasonably well off financially, had decent prospects, was this whole like, when are things going to go back? It's, are we going to go back to the office soon? Are things going to go back to normal soon? What's it going to look like on the other side? How long is this going to last? And that lack of control and the lack of knowing what was going on and when it was going to end was killing people.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really making people nuts. And the more people we talked to and engaged with, we realized it's not that these people are not tough, and it's not that they're not smart, and it's not that they don't have an ability to really gut it out and suck it up. Most people that you know and associate with, and most people I know and associate with, are very tough and can really suck it up. But it was the uncertainty. It was the fact that they were just holding on so tight and gritting their teeth so hard that we all at some point reach the extent of our endurance. You can't just keep doing things the way you did them and expect to get a different outcome. And we just realized that, hey, there's this whole other thing at play called perseverance. It's a necessary kind of adaptation or growth. We like to think of it sometimes as the process of becoming. When things are changing pretty rapidly and outside of your control, you have to employ a totally different set of tactics and be willing to kind of move with things and accept that kind of up and down process and maybe let go of what's around the next corner or when the finish line is going to be there.
Yeah.
And so we spent a bunch of time at the whiteboard and we talked to a bunch of people about this, and it was like the light bulb was going off for them. and we're like, okay, we're kind of on to something here. And then over the span of the next couple of years, the more times that we shared that message and related messages with audiences, the more light bulbs we saw go off, and we're like,
Hmm.
we probably should make a book out of this and share this more broadly because it seems to be kind of a key insight. And as the pace of change continues to accelerate in the world, and as administrations change and geopolitics change, and like everyone feels like, what the heck's going on around here? I think an ability to take a longer timeline and an ability to accept the change and to embrace one's ability to adapt and grow and become is probably more important now than it's been, at least in my lifetime.
Yeah, I kind of equate it to one of the things I talk about when I talk is, failure is a bruise, not a tattoo. It's one of our values at the Travis Manning Foundation, and when I'm giving talks, I talk about this idea of like our life is a series of successes and failures, right? And so it's this idea of like can't let the highs be too high or the lows be too low. You've got to understand that like when you are succeeding, when you've got that big win, you kind of have to know that there's probably going to be a failure right around the corner. But when you hit that fail point, you also know, hey, it's going to ebb up. And so this idea of just be persevering through, right? Because if you just try to gut that out with just straight endurance, that's going to be pretty challenging. So totally understand the concept and agree. Though I do love the word of endurance. I hate that it's put in a negative connotation
Yeah,
because
well, look, we love endurance. We have only good things to say about endurance. There are plenty of times in life, by the way, when what you need to do is just put your shoulder to the wheel and get through it.
yeah,
When you need to surge, when things are particularly tough for a defined period of time, if you're on mile 20 of a marathon, there are lots of times in life where you know what you need to do, you know when it's going to be over, and what you need to do right now is just get it done.
yeah, totally.
Just sort of suck it up. Like we're all for that. But one's ability, I think, to distinguish between like, is this just to put my head down and get through it kind of thing? Or is this an opportunity where I need to take a step back and do what you described, which is, hey, I might need to come off of this high and keep moving forward.
Yeah,
We talk all the time about how going down isn't the same as going backwards. And what we mean by that is as you continue to progress through life and move toward kind of some of your ultimate objectives, you may have to give up a little altitude from time to time in service of moving forward.
totally.
And I think people really struggle with that. You reach one of those kind of hilltop moments and you think, man, this is nice. And then you put your rucksack back on and you go, in order to keep moving forward on this journey, I may have to go back down into the valley,
Yeah,
but that's life. That's moving forward. That's persevering.
I love that. I like that analogy. I might have to steal that. The other thing that you have on the front of this book, and I want to talk to you about what you meant by that is lead. Well, it's perseverance is greater than endurance. Lead with resilience, grow through adversity, win together. So, talk to me a little bit about what leading with resilience means.
Yeah, I guess that's the title of the podcast. So I should probably talk about that word for a minute.
Let's talk about resilience.
Yeah. So I think lead with resilience, where I would start with that is if you are a leader, it's important to understand that your attitude, your demeanor, your ability to move forward has a massive impact on the team.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things in there in the book that help leaders to understand that as you go, often the team goes. And so we're trying to provide people with some frameworks, some understanding, and some tools to where they can weather a moment of impact, respond with a certain amount of calm, understand what it looks like to respond appropriately, and then to get their teams on board to move forward together. I think if you are a leader, whether you are in banking or the military or nonprofit work, your ability to take a setback and deal with it with a certain amount of calm, and then get your team to understand that, hey, this is the reality of our situation. It maybe is not good, but here's what we're going to do about it. And if we do that, we can ultimately win on the other end. It ends up making all the difference. Like we would say in SF all the time, that cool breeds cool, right? So if it is an absolute shit show going on around you, your ability to be calm at the center of that might be the total difference between whether your team stays together and rallies or completely falls apart. And so when I think about leading with resilience, that's really what I'm talking about first and foremost is, can you be the kind of leader that has the awareness and the tools to assess a bad situation, do your very best with it in the moment, and then bounce back from the setback afterward? Because it's not enough to be cool when things are really super high intense. We also have to have the ability to move on and move through it on the other side and not dwell on it or beat ourselves up about it. Like, I'll give you an example. When I was downrange and in Afghanistan and things went completely sideways for my team, I certainly was imperfect, but I'd like to think I was pretty calm. I was pretty collected. I did the best I could in those moments to get us through it. But I spent 3 years beating myself up about it afterwards. Right. Yeah. So dealing with the setback in the moment, I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at that. The Army trained me really well to do that. Bouncing back from that kind of setback, I did not have the capacity for at that time in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the harder play, right? I often talk about like I got through when Travis was killed, I just went full in, getting back to physical activity. I ran a marathon. I'm like, okay. And I just kept going from one thing to the next. It was like kind of this defense mechanism of kind of keeping busy, keeping cool, looking on the external side of things. It was like, whoa, she's crushing it. She's just going out. And it wasn't until 5 years later that I just took the biggest nosedive ever and hit my lowest point of my entire life. And I couldn't comprehend that it was 5 years later that I was hitting this low point, but I realized that I hadn't even taken the time to breathe from that moment. And so I can totally relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an important distinction. So we think of it kind of in 3 phases. Like, let's do everything we can to kind of shore ourselves up, knowing that some setbacks are going to occur. So let's make sure that we have strong relationships. Let's take care of our physical health. Let's take care of our emotional health. Let's be as solid as we can, knowing that things are going to happen that are bad and unfortunate. Then we talk about let's be really good at the point of impact, which we've talked about. And I think most people that are listening now are probably pretty good at that. Yeah. And then the third phase is probably the hardest for most of us, which is how do you help yourself and your team, kind of move on. Yeah. And that can be awfully tough.
Yeah. So, after you left, after you got out of the Army, you're with RWB. You also were with GoRuck. And like you said, we share a mutual friend in Jason McCarthy. I got into rucking, obviously, because of Jason. I met him in Atlanta. He gave me a rucksack. It had nothing in it. And my first ruck was just with an empty GoRuck backpack, and we rucked around this lake, and I was like, oh, I love this. This is great. We shuffled around. I'm like, I could do this. 3 years later, I was rucking the Marine Corps Marathon with a 20-pound plate in my rucksack with Jason next to me at mile 23 going, I'm quitting. I'm done. And he's like, you're not quitting. I mean, and he literally got me over the finish line. It was painful. But the idea of rucking, I just love it so much. I love everything about it. And I think it is just hilarious to see this like kind of pop surgence of rucking. You see all these celebrities and they're like, have you ever heard of rucking? It's hilarious. And I love how Jason's really grabbing onto it. Like anytime he sees a celebrity, he's like getting them a GoRuck backpack and listen, It's great. He should be doing that. But it's so funny how all of a sudden it's becoming so mainstream. And it's just a simple concept, right? Of just, and it all goes back to your time at West Point, your time in the Army. Every service member's got a ruck at some point. But bringing it kind of to like the mainstream place is just, it's really fun to see.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, oftentimes the simplest ideas are the most effective ones.
Yeah.
And, when I first met Jason, probably in 2013 or 14, he said, I think rucking can be bigger than running someday. And I was like, wow, that's a bold statement. And then, of course, a few years later, next thing you know, I'm working at GoRuck, and we're hatching a plot for rucking to become mainstream. And that was basically the three-part plan of how does GoRuck become a wildly successful business. Step one was grow rucking.
Yeah.
We need everyone and anyone to be rucking. People need to understand what this is, why it works, why they want to do it, and we have to grow rucking. So anywhere there's rucking happening, we should be there. So like we became the sponsor of the Bataan Memorial Death March. We're like sending rucksacks out to, little 5K races, and anyone that wanted a rucksack, we're like, yes, we need to grow rucking. And step two was own rucking. So that was the other piece, is like, if anyone's rucking, it should be completely synonymous with Go Ruck.
Totally.
That's why like Guy Fieri and Mike Rowe have Go Ruck bags
Yeah.
now, and instead of whatever the hell else they were
I saw
using.
Jessica Biel has a Go Ruck bag. I was dying. I'm like, all right, this is funny.
Ryan Reynolds. So that was the other part. Is like, we need to own it, because as soon as it has its day in the sun and becomes mainstream, the market's going to flood and everyone's going to try to get in on it. But if it's too late because it's already synonymous with Go Ruck,
Yeah.
then we're good. And the third phase was just deliver the promise, which means the rucksacks have to still be the best in the world, best customer service in the world, all of that. And so we just had to make sure we're still really good at what we do. And it has been awesome to see what Jason and the team at GoRuck have done the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's all happening.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's like totally predictable if you were with them way back in the day. But from the outside looking in, it's like, what the heck is going on with this?
Well, it's great, and they're such a great partner to us. But I think it's so funny because I now see these like middle-aged women living in suburban like America, and they're talking about like the new concept of rucking, and they've got their shiny Go Ruck bag, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I love it. And I love the benefits of it. And, for me, I will take going on a ruck any day over going on a long run. Well, listen, sometimes I like a long run in solitude for sure. But, in terms of a community event, like if I'm going to link up with a friend, we're not going to go for a run. We're going to go for a ruck. Because I know I'm getting those max benefits of having that weight on my back and still being able to have that great conversation with them. So it's good stuff. So let's talk a little bit about what comes next. Like, what is your plan with the book? Your plan with your company with Brandon? Like, you're out there, you're talking. People can hire you to come and really help apply these principles to their companies, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So Applied Leadership Partners is our business. We're in our 6th year now, which is crazy to think. It's all going by pretty quickly. But that is what we do. We fly all over the country and spend, anywhere from a half a day to a couple of days with businesses, and we help their leaders kind of align on their core principles and their culture and what they're trying to do. And we provide them with just good, solid, sound frameworks through which they can apply, core leadership principles. The way we look at it is like this. We would rather be useful than brilliant. And the way we think about things like empowerment or accountability or ownership, or name your favorite leadership buzzword, we would never claim to say that we have the only definition or framework around that concept. And I don't even like to argue with people that ours is the best. But what we know to be true, we know this to be true because we see it over and over again. If your organization has a shared leadership language, like if I say empowerment, you know exactly what I mean when I say that. I mean guidance, resources, and support, and it's not just some silver dollar word that we're throwing around. If we have a shared understanding of these principles and a simple framework through which to apply them, we will get better. And that is what we see over and over again, is that we get 10 or 12 people around a conference room table. They're all smart, they're all well-intentioned, they're all trying their best, but we ask them, what do you think of when I say this word? And we get 12 different answers. And it's like, okay, those are all good answers.
Yeah.
However, let's vector in on a shared understanding of how this can actually work within our organization, and let's put it to play, and it makes a world of difference for them. So that is really what we do as a core business. We speak quite a lot at this point, so we're always very happy to do that. But our entire goal is just to help leaders have a little bit easier go at getting their teams aligned and helping them to be more effective, because we haven't met anybody yet that wants to do a bad job.
Yeah.
We haven't met any teams yet that really dislike each other and are trying to sabotage the company, but we meet people almost every day that just haven't gotten themselves on the same page and are really moving in the same direction with a clear understanding of the kind of their goals, objectives, priorities, etc.
And now you've got the book to as a leave behind, right? Which is a great tool. I'll tell you. Listen, when I wrote my book in 2019, it was the best thing in terms of, again, all the blood, sweat, and tears that you put into it. But to be able to say, like, I leave this with you as the Bible for everything I just said. It's right here. So it's good stuff. I'm super happy for you and Brandon. And I'd love to know, outside of your book, I love asking people that have written a book, like, what book has inspired you the most?
Oh, wow. So my favorite book that I read almost every year is The Alchemist.
Okay.
It's a fictional book.
Yep.
I shouldn't say I've never, I read a lot of books and I like most of them. But I don't do well with reading books that are from like the same domain that I work in. So I haven't read a ton
Yeah.
of military history. I don't read a lot of business leadership, a little more now just to be familiar. But I love reading books that have kind of abstract concepts or things that loosely connect to what I'm doing that kind of open my eyes to a different way of thinking about things. So I've absolutely loved, I have it right here. In fact, I'll show you. I always have a few copies within arm's reach because I mail these out to people. I really love The Alchemist because I think it's a tale of betting on yourself. It's a tale of having faith, about staying with it, about treating every person as an end unto themselves rather than a means to an end. And I just feel like I get something new from it every time I read it. It's just a fun story. In the last year, I read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance,
Mm.
which is a very different book. It's very long and dense and very philosophical, but it was so deep. Um, the underlying kind of philosophy of the book like really struck me
Yeah.
about how to be a person in a world that's evolving technologically and kind of going faster and faster. Like, how do you embrace that while hanging on to your humanity? Um, anyway, I bet you wouldn't have guessed those two, but those are
I
the two
wouldn't
that
have
jump
guessed
out at
those
me.
two. A long, dense book. I don't know. I don't know how much I can attach to that right now, but I've never read The Alchemist, so I'm going to read that.
You totally should. It's
Yeah.
like 150 pages or
Yeah,
something. You'll like
that's a
it.
sweet spot for me. I can do that. So
Yeah.
yeah. Blayne, this has been awesome. I want to finish up with the last question I ask everyone. I typically ask, what does living a resilient life look like for you? But I want to ask you, how do you lead a resilient life?
Oh, wow. Good question. Okay, so two things. One is I try really hard to put myself in a position to be there for others, and not just there physically, but I think one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older is to really show up for people, to really be present for people, um, is a real gift, and I want to be better at it. I'm trying to be better at it. So it might look like just staying healthy or eating better foods, sticking with my training, getting enough sleep so that I can really show up when it's time to be with somebody, whether it's my kids or my spouse or a client or whatever. So taking care of the things I need to take care of so I can show up my best for others, I think is a big part of it. Um, and but the other thing is leading a resilient life, I think, involves taking the time to walk others through this. And what I mean by that is, like, I have an 8-year-old daughter, like many people do, who doesn't want to put her shoes on to go to the school bus a lot. And I have to be willing to spend the time with her to help her understand and learn why some of these things are important. And I have teenage sons that are, wonderful and terrifying most of the time. And they don't do things the way that I want them to, and I get upset and disappointed and all these things. But being able to be really with them rather than for them, I
Yeah.
think is what it all comes down to. Like, I spent my whole life trying to be there for people, and really only in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years have I realized that life is about being there with people. And that's a lot harder, especially if you're sharp and you're smart, you got a lot of answers, got a lot of good advice. Being there
So
with
good.
people is sometimes much harder than being there for people. If that makes
I
sense.
I could not love that more. I mean, I check myself on that all the time, you know, being there for people versus with people. And it's so much harder to be there with people.
So much harder.
And
yes.
obviously everything running through my head is all related to being a parent. You know, obviously you can put into but different contexts, but yeah, I get that and I feel that so much. This is awesome. Blayne, thank you so much. Best of luck with your book. We'll have the link on our YouTube channel so you can pick up your copy today. Thanks for all that you do for the military and veteran community, and being a partner in this, you know, post 9/11, just trying to do the best for our service members, and you've just done so much. So thank you, Blayne.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. It's really been good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.